Nearly half of all households in Uganda have only one bedroom, and typically 3 to 4 people share a room. That situation is even much more critical in urban areas where poor families have to share one-bedroom shacks in slums. In Kampala, 500,000 people are not adequately housed, a very worrying situation. Most of them are low-income families, either earning meager salaries or with no jobs to be able to afford decent housing. With the rural to urban migration now estimated at 7% per annum, the housing problem in Kampala is bound to get even worse. This is because the rate of people coming in is far higher than the available decent housing in the city. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics estimates that by 2025, Kampala will have close to 4.8 million people homeless if nothing is done about the housing situation. Development experts, however, note that providing housing for the urban poor is a daunting task. This is because most low-income families are too poor to afford leases or land title deeds, a prerequisite as collateral for building loans.
You have very many people coming in the city, but with little capacity to grapple with what the city requires, or what the city provides. So you have a mismatch between very many people coming, seeking for jobs, but the jobs are not available. The opportunities which they are seeking are not available for them to partake. And so you have a misnomer between what these people require and what the state can provide.
In the 1990s, providing low-cost urban housing was a high government priority, but the initiatives failed to keep pace with the influx of people from the rural areas, plus the high costs involved. In response, the government encouraged the private sector to put up housing. But the challenge here is that the private companies are driven by profits and will only construct houses for middle and high-income families, which can bring in returns.
For them, they are putting up structures which they think they can get profit out of their investments. And of course, these are houses of about 400,000 per month and so on. But how many people can afford 400,000 per month? And these are mostly the flat rates and the facilities which people are providing. Between 400,000 up to 1 million, isn't it? But how many people can earn a salary where they can be able to get housing for this kind of money?
Nakawa and Naguru housing estates were built in the colonial times as low-cost housing for the poor, but they are now in deplorable state. An attempt by the government to remodel them into a satellite city has proved daunting, with the occupants refusing to give way for the development. Urban planners also argue that providing housing can only be a long-term plan and not a plan that can be achieved in a 5-year presidential term. Housing developments may not be answered in a snapshot to satisfy the expectations of the electorates. This is because it takes time and planning for well-organized urban settlements, as has happened over time in developed cities. This probably explains why many, if not all, the presidential candidates are not squarely tackling the housing problem.
We are going to come up with a national physical plan, both for the urban areas and for the rural areas. We want to empower Ugandan to own money, him or herself. We can only provide housing for the disadvantaged groups, like the aged, people with disability, but we are not going to build houses for every Ugandan.
But the issue of provision of housing is a purely social sector issue, and it doesn't seem to be very highly palatable to majority of the people, and candidates are not addressing this problem, in which case it remains an issue which can bring serious problems if it is not handled. That's why it is needed to be taken squarely and handled and cannot be left to the private sector.
However, the NRM government has pledged to provide affordable housing by assisting developers with 25% of the infrastructure cost.
Competitors have come in, we are happy, because that's an area which needs still a lot of players. There's a shortage of housing in the country, so we need many people to participate in it. And we are hoping that many of them will come in with cheaper funds so that the cost of long-term funding and mortgages is there.
But this still will not help much because the costs will be passed on to the buyers in form of high costs of the house. But that still leaves out the most needy urban poor, who will still end up without adequate housing. In neighboring countries like Rwanda and Kenya, governments have formulated housing policies that favor the urban poor and are now miles ahead of Uganda.
In Kenya, you know, the industry has been there. It has been well developed. The Housing Finance Company of Kenya has been there since 1970s. They had no interruptions, and they have developers, and they have sources of funding, pension funds, which is what we are lacking. So in Kenya, the industry has been vibrant and properly developed. In Uganda, we lost opportunities in the 70s when chased away contractors and all that. And then we had a hyper-inflation, so it became quite difficult.
With a construction boom in the center of Kampala, urban planners highly recommend that the building of price-controlled apartments and constructing low-rental apartments could help solve the problem. Isabel Nakiria, NTV.